All right,
We're
James,
live.
you're trapped in a box,
Oh no, how can
live
I
on
get
stream and
out?
in a box.
Oh gosh.
That's the metaphysics for today.
Yeah. It's
No,
not
but
it's
yeah.
9 a.m. roughly 9 a.m. on a Thursday morning. What a great time to talk about Satan. Let's get the day
I mean,
off.
hey, if you're gonna do it, like, when else would you do it?
I
On a
guess
Friday?
night.
You wouldn't really
Yeah.
waste a Friday, would you?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's better to talk about Satan in the morning and then you're not going to bed thinking about it.
Yeah, that too. That too. I'll tell you one of the things that I find to be terribly irritating, but also helps me realize the power of media is that when I've asked people about angels or demons, where do
hmm
you think they get all their demonology from?
Probably like the Supernatural TV show or something like that. Probably like
Yeah, the movies. The
yeah.
movies 100%. Like I remember talking with this one dude and he's like, "Oh no, 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 but they're like this." And I was like, "What? Where are you getting that from?" I was like, "Wait, wait, wait. You got that from Constantine, didn't you?"
Yeah, yeah, something. Oh, that's from Lucifer, right? Netflix or I don't know
Mhm.
if it's a Netflix original. I think it was on Netflix for a bit though. Yeah, that's what that's from, right?
Yeah. Well, like so I think technically your book is like half about Satan, right?
Yeah, it's a big chunk of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know too many people that have written books on Satan, but yours was a more uplifting one because it had to do with victory and winning. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it's maybe a little odd. I don't know. Uh, it's like I'm gonna write a book about how Jesus saved us. Let me spend half of it talking about let me spend half of it talking about Satan. But I guess it makes sense.
Yeah. So you don't think that he's a red devil with a pitchfork?
That's just one of those areas where I think the Bible is silent on, and I think probably the church history is silent on that too. So I don't know if it's silent. I guess this means we can't say one way or another, right? So if
I
you
think
want
there's
to
a
believe
degree
that,
of reasonableness to that. I've actually wondered though, what's with the pitchfork? I don't know. Is that a
where does
unique
that come
trope?
from? Actually, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in all seriousness, yeah, I guess if there's no reason to picture him that way, I guess there's no reason to ascribe that to him. So maybe and there's also like if we're like postulating like aspects or like things that have explanatory power when it comes to Satan, I don't know if Satan being red or having a pitchfork has like any explanatory power with any particular Bible verses or things along those lines. So
Yeah. Now, I will tell you, I did debate another guy on the question of is Satan a real person?
mm-hmm.
He was arguing that he wasn't, and I was arguing that he was. And I do think that this is an important question because I have had a few different people that said, like, well, I don't think it really matters. Satan's not a
Mm-hmm.
person.
Yeah.
And so, what would you say about that?
I guess the philosopher in me is gonna be like, because I know how these like conversations go, and I've had these type of conversations with like
Yeah.
people about like demons in general and angels and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, like, well, what would we expect to see said about Satan if he was a person, right? Like, what are the type of things we would expect? You're like, aren't those the type of things we find like in the New Testament? Like, he should have seemed like it, and like you can like create some like framework to say, oh, like yeah,
Mm.
it's talking about him in this way only because X, Y, Z. I'm just like, you can do that with anything. You can create a framework to get out of anything that appears to be the case in the Bible, right? Like you could create a framework where Yahweh isn't the actual, creator God because you just set up your little framework and anytime you have a verse, oh, well, in my framework, this means this. Like, you can do that stuff. And you're like, I don't know. It's kind of just seems like the curtains are blue, right? Like there's that whole thing about like, like a poet or, you're reading something in class and it's like, oh, the curtains are blue. It's like, but why? What does it really mean to say the curtains are blue? I think it just means the curtains are blue, champ. Like I think that's the thing there. Yeah. So I mean, Satan in both the Old Testament, New Testament, and like early church and like Second Temple Jewish literature, he's talked about as being a person, like an agent who has volition and rebels, and he talks and things like that. So
Yeah.
and then in light of that, and what I would point out is like even because like when this topic comes up with like angels and demons and stuff, something I would point out is like, okay, even if I didn't have any like even if I didn't have like any biblical stuff to draw from, like I think we could have good like anthropological grounds for thinking like demons and spirits are real. Like like these are like just like if you were to look at like all of culture and their beliefs and reported experiences with these things, I think you can make a pretty like good case um, for affirming the type of realness of some negative evil or evil spirits just from looking at that. And so like all right, even if you want to do like this bobbing and weaving with the biblical data, which I think is like silly and ad hoc, um, I'm gonna be like, I don't know, like man, the experiential data of all humanity seems pretty strong in favor of this. Maybe we should just go with the simplest explanation,
Yeah, like I definitely think that the idea that Satan's a person is, to me, very strong and very evident. Like to me, of course, the temptation of Christ. I'm just like, what are you saying? Like Jesus is arguing with himself. I'm not really sure what's going on here.
I don't know.
I think that's pretty strong.
It's an internal conflict that
I
the
know.
narrator of the gospel has chosen to represent as this internal battle through the means. Like it's yeah.
Yeah. I've heard all the arguments. Now the one that I do think is kind of interesting, but I still am just like almost a little baffled as to why they hold it, is that like a lot of the scholars say like, well, yeah, the idea of a personal Satan wasn't even really a Jewish idea. Um, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I don't really understand. I don't understand some of those perspectives. And I do know even like some Christian academics, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
basically hold that view and they believe the New Testament. And I'm like, how do you reconcile the two? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're telling me that, oh, yeah, Satan's not in the Old Testament and magically he just shows up in the New Testament, like, this is a drastic departure. Do you think they weren't drawing on anything from the Old Testament?
Yeah, I think when we get to I think what we see in the New Testament is the development and clarification of themes and ideas that were present in the Old Testament and were developed in like the in the Second Temple period. And by saying like it developed, that doesn't mean like it's invented out of full cloth or like something like that. Like think about it this way: if you watch a movie, the character there's like the idea of character development. Like you learn more and more about the character as like the movie goes on, at least ideally. I think we see something similar with Old Testament, Second Temple literature, and New Testament, because something that scholars will point out is like in the Old Testament, Satan is a title, like it's a description, it's the accuser, right? Like in something like Job, like this isn't a proper name,
Yeah.
it's the. But then you have this okay, you have this figure, like he's called the accuser, and he seems kind of nefarious, and things like that. It was like okay, like you start calling him the accuser, and then it gets to the point where like that has almost become a proper name. And so now if you want to refer to him, you call him you call him Satan, which is what the Hasatan, it means accuser. um, and so I think something similar is with like the devil or Diablos or whatever it's originally. That is, I think it means like the slanderer or something like that. So there's like these concepts, and they were just like so connected with the figure that they take on and come to be the title. Like a good example of that is like we say Jesus Christ. Like Christ is the title. Like Christ isn't Jesus's last name, right? Like it's it's like Christ is it means like the Messiah, right? And so but now we all just refer to him as Jesus Christ. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and so like to me, that's one of the great examples is that, and this is another one. Like we were just talking about scholarship a little bit ago,
Hmm.
and it baffles my mind. But like so, like there's so many different references. So Hasatan and the accuser, and then there's the Azazel goat, that sort of notion,
Hmm.
and there's a few other places. Oh, the lawless ones. There's a lot of different examples, and the claim is for most is like, oh, it's not referring to the same person. Well, it doesn't use the same title. And I'm
Hmm.
like, so what? Like, I seriously don't understand that argument because it's like, well, guess what? Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's the Father of all. He's the, Savior. He's the Messiah. He's, the promised one. He's the high priest. He's the king, son of David. Like, it's
The
like, those are
word,
all
yeah, like
titles.
the Son of Man, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, okay, cool. Those are all titles. The main thing is like, when you read the Bible, why
Hmm.
don't they suspect that, oh, it's using the same characters? Because
Hmm.
to me, that's the interesting part is like, yeah, why wouldn't you think it's just referring to the same characters? Like without some stronger justification other than, well, it was a different title. Uh, I don't understand.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, we see in like, we see in like Job, there's this guy called the accuser who's, accusing in heaven, and then we see something similar in Zechariah, and then we
Mhm.
see that there's this kind of cosmic baddie, that's talked about in Genesis, who is talked about, and then a cosmic baddie pops up again in Isaiah and Ezekiel, and things like that. It's like, I don't know, it kind of seems like parsimonious just to think like, oh, this is like the same cosmic baddie, and that's an idea that, like you mentioned, like, and in like Second Temple literature, there's like other names for like the big cosmic baddie. I think it's like, I'm probably gonna mess up their pronunciations, like Belial or Belial or something like that, and like
Yeah, Belial. Yep.
Mathsama, something like that. People are gonna
Yep.
roast me for my pronunciation of it. But yeah, you get those ideas. Yeah, I think it's parsimonious. And then of course in the New Testament, like they do that. They're just like, so you have something like John Revelation 12, where it's like, yeah, the ancient serpent, the this, that, or the other, the dragon, the devil, Satan, it kind of lumps them together, and incorporates into that the ideas of, like ancient Near Eastern, chaos conflict, the conflict with the great sea monster, like all those things kind of come together, which I think makes sense.
Well, yeah, and like to me, the main thing is like the images are the same. It's like, oh yeah, it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, uh, sounds like a duck. Like,
Yeah.
why do you guys keep changing? Like, it's like, oh, he's got very similar descriptors. Yeah, he's the nefarious being, all those sorts of notions. And yes, I do really like your title of Satan and the Cosmic Baddies.
Hmm.
And so I've got to I made this just for you.
I haven't seen this. Okay. I don't know what's coming. Maybe I
I
should name
know,
my
be
book
afraid.
Satan and the Cosmic Baddies. Uh, I'm so ready. Oh, great. Why Satan and the Cosmic Baddies? Is Satan
This is like what the movie would be like, if it was a new movie coming out.
yeah, that's great. I thought you were gonna show me somebody said this would be a good band name, I think, Satan and the Cosmic Baddies. I thought you were gonna show me like a like an album or something like that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so let me see here. Hold on.
Yeah, we just need to find someone to write the screenplay for my atonement model, and then we'll be good to go.
Yeah, don't worry, James. I got you covered, buddy.
Oh, there we go. Oh, you knew. There it is. You knew it was coming. That's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, that's
Oh
funny.
yeah, right there, man. I mean, come
That's
on, that
funny.
just sounds like a band that you would go to or something, right?
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, I'm going to see Satan and the Cosmic Baddies.
that's a pretty good one. Yeah, man. I need to find a way to capitalize on this name. Maybe I need to do another book and about Satan and make that the name. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that to be like it's a tough subject because I hate to be misleading, and personally, actually, I myself was thinking of doing a book on Satan. I wanted to just cover the fall of Satan and cover a bunch of the verses that everyone is completely confused about,
Hmm.
and totally misunderstands. Um, I've got one more for you though. I think I thought this one looked pretty good too. Just saying, man.
This one looks like
You
the
know,
Avengers or something. This looks like
yeah,
the
this is gonna be the new like oh, what do they call them? Like, are they called adult novels or comics?
uh
I
uh,
can't remember the
uh
name.
graphic
There's a
novels.
more graphic novels. Yeah.
Yeah.
This would be like a more like hardcore graphic novel, like Satan and the Cosmic Baddies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Satan looks kind of like Hades from the old Disney movie or something with the hair, the fire hair.
Hercules.
Yeah, Hercules. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it was blue, we might have some copyright issues on our hands.
Well, like, okay, Hades. Hades is a great example of like, yeah, like that would be like somebody that pretty much represents Satan,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because like one of the aspects that I thought was super fascinating when I got to study into Satan is
Hmm.
like the idea that he's kind of the god of death.
Yeah. Yeah. The one who holds
And
the power of death. Yeah.
yeah, no, like seriously, right? And it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
so he's like the god of death, he's the god of the dead. And it's
Hmm.
like dude, why have I never heard that before? Because
Yeah.
also I do think, because I always wondered, when you're a kid, Satan runs hell, right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
like, he's the devil with the little pitchfork, and he's the god of hell. And then we grow up, and it's like, oh no, God's kind of in charge of all those things. And it's like, okay, then like, why do we always have Satan, like the one depicted as the one ruling hell, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's
Because
because, yeah, he is the ruler in a sense. He's the ruler of the place of the dead.
yeah, like well, Satan being the ruler of hell makes for better TV. So it
Well,
makes for better pop
that
culture.
too.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
no, yeah.
like yeah, so Satan is like depicted as like he's like the prince of darkness, like there's the domain of darkness, stuff like that. So like in some degree, it's like the land of the dead is like associated with his kingdom. I don't know so much that
Mhm.
like we get a whole lot of like him ruling it, but, like explicitly, but there is talk about like it's his kingdom. Like I don't know if you've looked much at like the Dead Sea Scrolls, like the war text from Qumran and stuff like that.
I
Have
don't
you?
know exactly what you're thinking of.
Yeah, so
So,
it's
no.
interesting. I looked into it a bit for some of the Christology stuff I'm working on because in it, it's like really explicitly there's the Prince of Light and there's the Prince of Darkness, and like there are the children of the Prince of Light and there's the children of the Prince of Darkness, and like I think if I remember correctly, it's like the idea of like oh yeah, like the Prince of Darkness and like the servants of the Prince of Darkness, like they're attacking the princes of the children of the Prince of Light, and trying to like destroy that kingdom and that thing.
Well,
So
that's in
like
the Bible.
yeah, like so actually like some of the like ideas and concepts that are there, like they sure do sound like stuff that you see in the Johannine writings, like John, and then also like First John, Second John, things along those lines. I think First John is the one that, like
It's
I
First
was
John.
yeah, First John, it opens up. I remember I was at like a church small group Bible study type thing. It was more like a community group. And they're like, "Oh, we're gonna start working through John," and they read First John, and we were like read the first chapter of First John or something like that. And they were like, "Does anybody have any thoughts on this?" I'm like, "Oh, let me read. Like this sounds like this thing from this Qumran text," and I like read it. And I was like, "Oh," and like people were just like. Yeah, people weren't super
Glazed
into it.
over.
Yeah, I had some. Yeah, and then I was like bringing in other stuff about like the logos and John and things like that. And someone afterwards was like, you gotta bring it down. You gotta dumb it down for us. People were not following. But I was like, oh yeah, like let's break out the Dead Sea Scrolls here. But yeah, there's really interesting stuff in there. And like once you start looking at the Second Temple text, I mean like don't get me wrong, like in some areas Second Temple text are like all over the place. Like they're not in like full
Yeah.
agreement of stuff, but there are like some residual themes that like keep popping up.
Yeah. I was actually learning some really interesting stuff from the Targum Pseudo Jonathan.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah. So there were some really interesting rewrites that actually, actually are going to be in my next book, my book coming up,
Mm-hmm.
because they actually connect really well. And it's really funny because, well, what's really funny to me is like if you find something and you see how it fits, and then you listen to everyone else talk about what they think it's saying, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's not right at all.
Yeah.
um, but
That's yeah. Go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead.
what were you just saying? I wanted to comment on something you were just
Like
saying
the
about. Okay, yeah. All the targums and all these other things. Oh, yeah. I was going to say this. So John, and this is also what convinces me. Well, much more convinces me that John, whoever wrote John, First John, and Revelation, are the same person.
mm-hmm.
All three of those texts hit on Genesis 3 through 4
Mm-hmm.
more than any other gospel.
Interesting.
Like more than the rest of the other writers. Now, I'm not going to say necessarily Paul does address like Gen 3 some, so kind of excluding Paul, but regarding
Mm-hmm.
the other gospels, like they all speak on similar concepts in John, First John, and Revelation. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's like a really strong connection that's can actually be really helpful in understanding Revelation 12 and some of those other stuff all relates back to Gen 3.
Yeah, and with the Targums, scholars have multiple scholars have noted that there are things in John that sure do seem like he's drawing from the Targum translations or versions of it, because like things he says or like translations he uses, they correspond more closely to the Targum than like other things in the Septuagint or the Hebrew Bible, stuff like that. Yeah, I was actually reading stuff about that yesterday. I stayed up late looking at stuff in the Targums for my Christology project that I'm working on, because the Memora of the Lord is yeah, it's this fun little interpolation into the Old Testament text, and it's something that some scholars have noted that John it was likely an influence on the Johannine thought in the fourth gospel. But yeah, if you find interesting things in the Targums related to like other stuff, like the stuff you've been working on, like I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah. Well, one of them I guess I'll sort of spoil here and stuff. I thought it was really cool, and it's not for some people it won't immediately stand out, but for some people that know what's going on, it'll stand out. But so like you've got Gen 4:1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a highly contested verse in and of itself. And so Gen 4:1 is the birth of Cain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got like a bunch of other stuff going on, but there's one main part that I'm going to focus on. So normally it says, now the man knew his wife Eve, she conceived, gave birth to Cain, and said, I've gotten a man with the help of Yahweh. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. She gives birth to Cain, all that's cool, right? Now, some of the weird stuff regarding the verse itself is like the idea. Oh, did I not? Oh, here it is. Okay. Is the fact that like everyone always quotes it as like, oh, she got a man from Yahweh, right? But
Mm-hmm.
technically there's not the preposition that you would usually have there for from or with the help of or all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just kind of added into the text. And so like, yeah, if you read it flatly, right, it sounds like she's potentially calling Cain like God, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's like, oh yeah, like I've gotten a man, and it just says Yahweh.
Yahweh.
It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like interesting. Now, I definitely know there are plenty of arguments that kind of go like, yeah, it shouldn't or couldn't be translated exactly that way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's leave that aside for half a moment. But part of the other thing that I think is really interesting is that so my work, of course, is focused around Gen 3:16.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the main point there, well, I've got a whole bunch of stuff on it, but one of the main points, right, is that in
Mm-hmm.
the second half of Gen 3:16, it's God speaking to the woman, and he says, yet your desire will be for your man, and he will rule over you. All
Mm-hmm.
right. Now, this is also more interesting when you read the Targum version of Gen 3:15,
Mm-hmm.
because Gen 3:15 goes from like, oh yeah, it's like kind of messianic to explicitly
Full blown.
it's
Yeah.
got most of the normal stuff, but then it ends with King Messiah. King
Mm-hmm.
Messiah is the one who's
Mm-hmm.
going to crush the head of the serpent, and it's like you can't get any more explicit than King Messiah.
Yeah.
So but the Targum in Gen 4:1,
Mm-hmm.
it reads this way. It says, and Adam knew Hava, his wife, which is the other translation for
Mm-hmm.
Eve. So Adam knew his wife, who had desired the angel, and she conceived and bare Cain, and she said, I've acquired a man, the angel of the Lord.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting.
Tell me that's not cool.
The Targum says, I required a man, the angel of the Lord. That's very
Yes,
interesting.
that's what it says.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, now remember what I said is that your desire shall be for your man, which is
Yeah.
referring to the Messiah.
Yeah.
And she says, who desired the angel
Mm-hmm.
in Gen 4:1. So now it says, oh, yeah. She's doing what? She's desiring the angel of the Lord, and she has Cain, and she is thinking and hoping that he is the angel of the Lord.
Interesting.
How much
Yeah.
more messianic could it get than
That's
that?
really, yeah, dude, that's
Right?
really wild. Yeah. Yeah, you might have some fun stuff to feed into some of the stuff I've been working on, because I've been doing stuff regarding Angel of the Lord and the embodied Yahweh and stuff like that, and Targums. And yeah, like I've got quite a list of things. But if you find stuff like that, that could be really influential and helpful potentially in my work. Because like I haven't been doing a whole lot of stuff regarding like Old Testament like messianic prophecies. I've mainly just been looking at like how are they talking about the embodied Yahweh or the visible Yahweh. Um, but yeah, that could be like, that's really interesting. If you find other stuff like that, like send it to me. Have you
Well,
um have
yeah,
you looked at the Targum Neophiti? I think it's pronounced.
maybe that probably might have been a while ago. I'm not entirely sure. Which passage is that looking at?
So the Targum
'Cause-
Neophiti is so there are different Targums. There's like I'm probably gonna mispronounce it,
Yeah,
like Onkelos, and then there's Pseudo Jonathan. Um, and so Neophiti is it's I think it includes all of the Torah, and it's considered like I think it's considered one of the best representations of like the Palestinian Targum. So I don't know if you're familiar with like the discussions
yeah.
about, yeah, like the like
So yeah, I was reading some of that last night.
yeah, so the idea is like some of the later targums, or like what becomes official in like rabbinic Judaism, are censored in some ways, and so some scholars have been interested in the Palestinian targum, which is believed to more accurately reflect, something like what would be found in first century Palestine. And so yeah, so I've been looking at Neophiti because there are some things that get either repressed or rewarded, or maybe censored later on, which are still more manifest there. So yeah, so like McNamara has some translations available of Neophiti. And if you ever want to just like, I don't know if you have access
Yeah,
to his books,
I
but like if you ever
think
have like a few passages that you want to see, like, oh, how does Neophiti, I may be mispronouncing that, by the way, Neophyte, something like that. If you ever have any passages where
yeah.
you're like, oh, like I want to see what it would say about this, like DM me. I have access to those. And I was flipping through them last night,
Cool.
just Control F, like looking for some keywords. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's been one of the things. That's one of the things. Like the reason that I've had to do like lots of independent research is like sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes scholars overlook certain things for stupid
Yeah.
reasons. Like
Yeah.
there's little nuanced reasons. Like for example, because certain things are established,
Mm-hmm.
right? That therefore, like people are like, oh, well, we don't look at that one. Like, well, why not? Well, because we know that it's. Well, great example. Okay, Gen 3. I had this discussion with another scholar. He's like, I do ask him some questions for Hebrew stuff because he's like completely fluent in Hebrew, and
Mm-hmm.
so he does all the hard work.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're talking about Satan, and he's like, oh no, Satan's not in Genesis 3. It's like, well, why not? Like, well, because Satan isn't thought of until the Second Temple period. That's it.
Yeah.
Like rolled out.
Yeah.
And then just sent me some quotes by some scholars, including John Walton and stuff like that. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, whatever, man.
Yeah, it's like with some of those, yeah, like with some of those things. Like I gave a presentation in my doctoral program on. I have a video on my YouTube called "Do We Teach Rulers in Heaven," which I don't know if you've seen it. I'm pretty proud of it. Like it's like related to my atonement stuff, but it like is more about like the role of the church and
Uh-huh.
worship, and the idea of like there's this phrase in Ephesians 3:10 about like the church is going to make God's wisdom known to the rulers in heaven. Like that's pretty wild. Like why don't we talk about that more? But anyway, so I did a presentation on that for like a ecclesiology class. And in like the QA portion, someone was, yeah, there's a guy in there who was like, but this is, like the Jews didn't think about Satan like this. The Jews like, I'm like, yeah, they did. Like, yeah, they did. I'm like, according to the Old Testament and in Second Temple like times, yeah, like they thought about this. Like they may have had like different names or different, like ways of referring to him, but like the idea of like a big main cosmic baddie, like it's all there. And I do not buy the like there's an idea of like, oh, well, like Satan like began as like in the Old Testament as like a loyal member of like God's host, as like the accusing figure, which like even if that's true,
Yep.
like I don't think that makes like a huge deal to like my general like atonement model and stuff. But also I'm like, I feel like you guys will read some stuff into Job. Like, I don't get the vibe that like the accuser and God are like homies in this verse. Like, I don't get the vibe that this is like not a conflict to begin with. Like, this seems pretty adversarial from the start. Um, yeah, I think there's, and that's something that like Heiser talks about, right? Is like people like bring to the table, interpret like some exegetical philosophies about development in the text, and he like that's one of the things I love about Heiser is like a good bit of his written work is him just being like, "What are you talking about? Like the idea is right there. Like you're telling me like this is a developed idea, but he's like, this is supposedly one of the like the oldest texts, right? Like there's
Yeah.
that idea." Like here it is, and like it's here and it's there. So from whence is this development, you know? And so yeah, there's a lot of golden cows in scholarship that need to be re-examined.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I want to slay some of them because they're they're wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
slay the
and one of
serpent. You
them,
want to slay the serpent?
yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly, exactly. Well, one thing that I thought was kind of cool is that actually I was thinking about it. I was like, you know what? The Bible really does go back to the traditional. I wish I had a good Jordan Peterson accent. I would do it for that, right? But the traditional dragon prince, like slay the
Hmm.
dragon, save the princess, and live
Yeah,
happily ever after, restore the kingdom.
yeah,
Like that's what Genesis is about.
yeah. Like yeah, like you got the princess is the church, right? Like the bride of Christ. Christ is the the prince of
Hmm.
the host. You've got the dragon, which is Satan, the devil. Yeah, yeah. It's all there. It's the
Yeah.
prototypical
Well,
fairy
so
tale there.
like yeah, yeah. So for like a little bit more detail into the biblical narrative, right? It's like, okay, Genesis 1. All right, God fixes and orders the kingdom. Cool. Then he establishes mankind, gives the kingdom over to man, and says, "All right, son, do a good job." Right? So mankind goes off, la di da 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 da. And then what? Almost exactly like Maleficent, right? Shows up. Here comes the Satan, right?
Hmm.
Shows up. Um, except for yeah, I'll go ahead and be a little more on the full soul side. Satan doesn't show up as this evil figure like right
Hmm.
away. Satan is there as one of God's loyal subjects.
Hmm.
He's one of God's loyal subjects. He's one of God's, faithful ones. And he decides, like, yeah, I've had enough of this. I want the kingdom. I want to have the kingdom. Why should man have it and not me?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so then he steals the kingdom away from mankind. And, so the kingdom is lost. And then the woman is captured because they're all caught up in slavery now,
Hmm.
slavery to sin, slavery to the serpent and all of that. And then what? And then it's just like a movie, right? There's a prophecy about a promised prince that's going to be born and who's going to slay the dragon.
Yeah. And that's like really similar to like how I cash out the ideas of Satan in my book of like, yeah, like Satan, like he was the guardian cherub of Eden. Like he looked pretty, like he looked good, like he had all these like crown jewels and stuff on him. And so like when Satan rolls up and he starts like tempting Eve, it's not like there's like this literal talking, obviously weird snake who's like, "Hey, eat that apple." Like this is like a celestial looking being who like, is part of God's entourage in some degree, or is like in God's, employment. And he's like, "Oh no, you guys just misunderstood. That's not what he was saying. He was actually saying this. Like you're fine to do that. Like this is like your coordinator at work, or like you're like immediate supervisor at work, being like, oh no, big boss is fine with this. Like you misread the training. Like this is fine. Go ahead. You're like, oh, okay. Like that's not to take like responsibility or like guilt away from Adam and Eve, but like it makes a lot more sense of why like Adam and Eve would engage. And the way I phrase it in the book is like, yeah, this makes a lot more sense of why God would allow Satan around his humans who just were fresh out of the oven, so to speak. Like it's like God's not like, okay, I've got this guy, because like you have, I think it's like Milton and stuff and like Paradise Lost, who
Yep.
they present Satan as like he's rebelled, he's fallen, and then humans come along, and then it's like already fallen Satan tempts them. It's like, why is already fallen Satan tempting them? Now you could no, I actually have some ways, I have some ways that you could make that work and could make sense. So like I give the idea in my book of like, um I give the idea in my book of like Satan tempting Adam and Eve, getting them to fall, and then using their fall like in his arguments against God and like the divine council. But then you could do it the other way. You could be like Satan's maybe having an argument in the divine council, and God and it is like a Job scenario where Satan's like, let me test it, like let me test it. I bet I can get him to follow me, and God's like, all right, you can try. Like it could be something like that, and so it could be that because this is a big question people ask, like why was the tree there in the first place? Why was Satan allowed to mess with them, so on and so forth? But if you think this is something similar to Job, where God's like allowing his creatures to be tested for this argument going on in the divine council, it's like, okay, like this makes sense. Like Satan's being allowed to present and argue his case, and God's like working through that medium. Yeah, so I think that's a plausible line, but it's the typical notion, not typical, like maybe popular notion of like, yeah, you had just like Satan, he fell and he was like, I hate God, I want to cause pain, and he's just like, comes in like a pouty child. I mean, maybe that's it, maybe that's what happens. Maybe I'm like off base, but I don't know, it kind of makes more sense to me. Like Satan's already like in the general vicinity, and he's like, this is my shot. Like he sees Adam and Eve, and he's like, this is it, this is my moment, I can work with this, like.
So I want to pitch this one a little bit to you.
Yeah.
So this is the one that like stretches a little further, because I've had a little bit of warring between myself, like back and forth. Oh yeah. I'll pop this one up here, but I do want to get to this other one. But yeah, the idea that like, see, I've often thought that like, yeah, there's this degree like, oh yeah, maybe they're jealous of Adam and Eve and all that stuff, and they want to rule and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But here's one that I've wondered.
So I just want to comment on that. So that's actually an idea that pops up. Oh, I forget the name. It's either like the Testament of Abraham or like the Apocalypse of Moses or something like that. I forget the exact name. But it's I think it's around first or second. I think it's maybe second century CE. So it's like around the time of Christianity or later. There's this work that it's Jewish/Jewish Christian, and in it, that's pretty explicitly what's going on. God creates humans, and God's kind of tells the heavenly host, like, this is my image, like bow down before them, worship them, something like that. And Satan's like, I was here first. They should worship me, and like this is kind of like the thing that goes on here is like no, I'm not gonna bow down before them. Like I'm older than them. Like they should be bowing to me. And so it's like that type of hubris, pride thing that comes up. So that's an interesting motif that was or idea that was present like very early on. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think there is almost this kind of notion, but one of the ones I've thought and wondered about is like the idea that there was always this promise of Jesus coming down to earth, regardless of a fall, right? So let's just imagine hypothetically there was no fall. There still would be this merger. There still would be this Messiah to come down. There still would be, the kind of the union between God and man. And so if that's the case, if there would be a union, a merger between God and man, and then maybe Satan was jealous of this idea of, God being the one to, again, get all of the glory. Now, one of the reasons for thinking this, though, is Genesis 2:24. Very strange little passage, but it's the passage where right after Eve is made or born, however you want to parse that out, she comes out of Adam's side. Right after that occurs, then it says like that for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall be joined to one flesh. And you might think for a moment, like, well, that doesn't really sound like a prophetic verse, except Paul explicitly mentions it in Ephesians chapter 5. And so it's like, well, what is Paul mentioning it for? He mentions it in Ephesians 5 and says, and for this is a great mystery, for I am referring to Christ and the church. And it's like, okay, so like he sees it as a prophetic message. Now, the reason that, of course, I think it stands out even stronger as a prophetic passage is, again, it's a reference to this man who's going to be made. And you see the man show up again in Genesis 3:16 And then Eve echoing those words, for I've gotten a man. And so for those reasons is like, okay, so it sounds like Jesus is prophesied to come one way or another.
So what's interesting is, have you heard Mullins talk about the incarnation anyways approach?
No, I haven't.
I think it's Mullins who talks about this. Yeah, so there's an idea that's floated around. I think maybe Swinburne talks about this as well, but like there's this idea in theology that's been discussed about like the incarnation anyways, and this is the idea that
Hmm.
even if nobody had fallen, like even if no one had, even if Eve hadn't fallen, even if everything had been hunky dory, there's this idea that God would have become incarnate anyways. That there's
Yep.
this idea that this is already something God would do because through this he can have better fellowship with his creatures and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, so this is an idea that's like theologians have like flirted with and poked around with for other reasons. But I think like what's interesting is, and this is one of those things where it goes back to Genesis. I'm gonna be like, yeah, I think like I think we have pretty good grounds for thinking something like that, because in Genesis, right, when Adam and Eve do sin, they heard the sound of the Lord. They heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And something that I harp on for
Yeah.
a decent bit in my Christology work that I'm working on is you cannot avoid the fact that in the Old Testament God is depicted as visible and embodied. Like you can't avoid it. And this is something I'm gonna like
Mhm.
harp on a lot and talk about like how do like Jewish later Jewish writings, like how do they deal with this in light of conceptions of like God's glory, God's face, or God's glory can't be seen, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but like yeah, you've got pretty explicit statements about people beholding the form of the Lord, stuff like that. And so I was like, well, yeah, like it kind of seems like Adam and Eve were already like talking with maybe not an incarnated in the sense that Jesus was, but like a visible and embodied Yahweh. And this is something that okay, so here's an idea. I mean, like, this is not necessarily Satan language, but so I've had thoughts before about like pre-fallen humanity and post-fallen humanity. The How do I phrase this? So like the idea I'm thinking of here is like the difference between like how, let's say the Lord walking in the garden, right? Or the Lord
Hmm.
in the visible embodied in the Old Testament, like how he is, compare that to how Jesus is, like the difference there. What if that like same difference in like the way he's embodied, that's the distinction between how mankind was, how we are now because of the fall, and how we will be, in the sense of like it's still embodied, but what was lost was the so there's in some Jewish writings there's this idea that Adam was clothed in garments of light. There's this idea of like the type of like conceptions of divinity and in splendor and stuff like that that were associated with divinity. Like Adam like had that, and like that's potentially what was lost. You're smiling like this is something that like touched like a thought with you. Just anyways, this is like the idea I'm thinking of is like what, like if we think that Christ shows up and he's embodied and visible and stuff like that, what makes that difference from like the incarnation is something I'm tempted to say is like, well, with the incarnation he becomes incarnate and embodied and stuff like that as we are, without with in a sense putting aside the garments of light, putting aside the immortality that we're later going to put on, things along those lines. Yeah, what are you smiling over there about?
Yeah, I know. I'm notorious. I have that look, and even my old teachers, they got the hang of it. But yeah, I just one, I'll just say like I really don't hold to like any embodied light views for Adam anyway. I
Oh
definitely think that
yeah.
that was not there. So because like when I think that I'll put it this way. I
Hmm.
think that way too many people have read perfection into the first two chapters of Genesis
Hmm.
where it wasn't meant to be read. In
Interesting.
other words,
Yeah.
I think that let's take the world for the example, because I've done a bunch of debates on like against young Earth creationism, but
Hmm.
that's a whole other topic. But it's really related because when you when you read Genesis 1, right? Genesis 1, and you read the
Mhm.
first two verses, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was void and formless. The darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Okay,
Mhm.
right? So what you have is you have a disorganized, chaotic world. Okay,
Mhm.
right? That makes
Mhm.
sense. Okay, then God orders a bunch of stuff, right? And I
Mhm.
think the assumption is he orders everything.
Mhm.
But I think that's an assumption. And I actually don't think that's what happens. I think the notion is that God does some of the work. And then I think when you see Adam in Genesis chapter 2, and he's
Mhm.
what? Being shown how to name the animals. This is God
Mhm.
showing, like, hey, Adam, like, hey, look, I did stuff over here. Now you name
It's your
stuff.
turn.
Now you order
Yeah.
stuff. And it's the idea that God doesn't finish the planet. He
Mhm.
doesn't finish completing and making a perfect creation.
Mhm.
No, man is meant to finish that task and job.
Mhm.
And Adam just didn't get very far.
No,
So,
yeah, I'm on board with that. Yeah, that meshes very well with the stuff I say in chapter 5 of my book about like, why does God create? Like, he wants us to like participate in creation with him, stuff like that. Um,
mhm.
I don't know. Have you read The Silmarillion by Tolkien?
I have not. I've heard of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
All
So
my
I like,
cousins and uncles would probably shoot me to hear that I haven't read it because I'm pretty sure
yeah.
most of them have, but
So I did a live stream with Mike Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, and I'm getting our names confused, and I'm one of the persons. It's shameful. So I did this live stream a while back with Mike, and we talked about like why hasn't God destroyed Satan yet? And actually, at the beginning of that video, we spent a hot minute talking about Lord of the Rings. Um, and it was relevant to the video we were responding to, but in it, I spent a good amount of time using the Silmarillion by Tolkien as kind of a springboard or an analogy or a way of thinking about God's view of creation and why he allows Satan and stuff like that. Because long story short, I'll direct people to see the video if they want to see me nerd out. I think I was reading the comments. I think I was reading the comments of like the live stream afterwards, and someone was like, "Garb's autism is on display" or something like that. It was like I was like, I can't even be mad about this because I was like, we were getting the deep lore. Yeah, so it was like the idea of Iluvatar, who's the Yahweh figure in Tolkien's world. He creates these other beings who are, I think they're called the Anor. I'll mess up their names. I'm gonna call them the gods. That's kind of the Elohim of his world. Um, and Iluvatar like sings them into creation, and he teaches them how to sing. Like he teaches them how to make
Mm,
music, like first one at a time and then together. And then Iluvatar like kind of invites them to contribute to his melody. Like he creates this melody and the song, and he invites them to incorporate the stuff that they have and what they've learned, and bring it into this melody that he's creating. And then they're shown that this melody that they're helping creating with him, it's revealed that that melody is what comes to create Arda, like the planet and the world and stuff like that. And Melkor, who's the Satan figure, he is the he starts, his music, it's very discordant, it's very rambunctious, so to speak, it's clamorous, it's noise, and he starts trying to throw off the tune. And then what Iluvatar does is he incorporates the beats and the melodies of Melkor into the original melody, so then the melody changes to incorporate Melkor. And so like this is the kind of idea, is like Iluvatar gives them the ability, and then he alters his plans around the rebelliousness. But then long story short, like Melkor keeps being obnoxious, and then there comes a silence, and then Iluvatar has this phrase of like, so you will see, Melkor, that there is no song that can originate, like is not originally sourced in me, behold your work or whatever. And it shows how their songs that they made contributed to the creation of Arda. And so there's this idea there. The reason I say that is like I do think there's this idea of God is the God creates by himself. God, there's this idea in Isaiah of like, I alone created, so on and so forth. But governance is not an idea that is it's governance is not something that is associated with Yahweh alone, which I think is what you were
right.
getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of, the original intention, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly just think that this is a theme that's throughout scripture, and you see it there in
Mm-hmm.
Genesis 1 first, and then you kind of have the loss of the kingdom with the, Satan kind of taking over. But then that's the whole point of Jesus coming back and saying, like, hey, look, all authority in heaven and on
Mm-hmm.
earth has been given unto me. So reestablishment of, the rightful authority and ownership of the earth. And then what are we supposed to do? You're supposed to go into the world preaching the gospel, teaching them to obey all that he's
Mm-hmm.
commanded, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so I think that that's exactly kind of partially what God has in mind. So
Yeah, so tell you what, if you want, I can so people know that we're not crazy here. I have actually in my notes, my Devil's Disbarment notes, right? I have a couple quotes from early church fathers, right, about this topic that we're talking about, like God, delegates authority in this way. Um, so Justin Martyr, this is in his second apology, chapter 5, says, God, when he made the whole world and subjected things earthly to man and arranged the heavenly elements for the increase of fruits and rotation of the seasons, and appointed this divine law, for these things also he evidently made man, committed the care of men and of all things under heaven to angels, whom he appointed over them. But the angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by love of women and begot children, who are those that are called demons. And besides, they afterwards subdued the human race to themselves, partly by magical writings and partly by fears and the punishments they occasioned, and so on and so forth. But it's this idea of like, okay, God, parted things out this way. There's a quote by I think Papias in it shows up in a later church writer where he says, some of them, that is the divine angels of old, he gave authority to rule over the earth and commanded them to rule then, and then and it happened, their arrangement came to nothing. This shows up in Oregon. It shows up in I think it's Athenagoras. Like, this is an early Christian idea. It's not something like it sounds weird. It sounds bizarre to talk about God delegating this type of authority in this way, because a lot of modern Christendom is like, it's like materialistic isn't the right wall, but it's one that's just like completely like hand waved away, like the spiritual realm, or like the unseen realm, as like Heiser would call it. But like the Old Testament, New Testament, I would say like to some degree like Second Temple works, and then the early church writers, like they had this conception of like God's not just doing things alone, like he's delegating authorities, and he's doing things like that. Um, and this is something I'll conclude on this note. So there's like this huge discussion. Here's where I think, so like this live stream we're doing is about Satan. I think Satan, like the importance of having like a proper theology of Satan is crucial to two main areas of theology, right? Like it's going to touch on a lot of different stuff, right? But here's the areas where I see it as the most significant. One is atonement, right? Like this is what Jesus saves us from, that, right? The Devil's Disbarment, shameless plug. It's free. My book is free on Amazon. The ebook is. And then I think problem of evil, right? So this is something that like there are people in the problem of evil literature who do this type of stuff. Like they talk about this cosmic conflict stuff, but I really don't think the cosmic conflict motif gets incorporated enough properly by philosophers and theologians sometimes. So this is something I didn't incorporate into my book, but I kind of kicked myself in retrospect because like I knew it at the time. I think it was probably somewhere in my notes, or I had read it. I might have just forgot. And this is an idea that John Peckham draws on in his book Theodicy of Love, which has a really strong like cosmic conflict motif, and it's something it helped me in developing my atonement model. Is when in the New Testament, when Jesus, he gives the parable of the sower and the seeds, right? He gives the parable of like, oh, you have this master farmer or whatever. This is gonna be like the James paraphrase of this parable, right? You got the master farmer. He goes out. He sows some seed. The seed that he sows, it's banging. Like it's great, right? It's fire. Really good seed. And then at the night, an enemy comes and sows bad seed. And then the farmers are like, "What's up, master farmer?" Like his tenants are like, "What's up? Why are there weeds? Didn't you sow good seeds?" And then the response of the master is, "Yeah, an enemy has done this." Like it's not like, "Oh, actually the weeds are really good and they're just there to help the development of the plants." Like he's like, "No, an enemy's done this." And then they're like, "Well, let's just like tear it up now. Like let's just get these weeds out of here." And the master says, "No, because if you do that, you're gonna rip up the good as well. Like there's this idea of like if you destroy the bad that the enemy's done, that's actually going to counteract and destroy the good that I was trying to bring about. And then Jesus makes really explicit that the enemy is the devil. The enemy, the one who sows the bad seed, is the Satan figure. Um, and so like people may stumble upon this and be like, I think maybe there's this idea of like I think you touched on the idea earlier. It was like, it doesn't really matter, whether or not this is actual, like Satan figure. Like we talked about that. It's like, well, like it matters to atonement and to theodicy. It matters to atonement and the problem of evil of like why, if there's this guy and if this is the general idea we're talking about and that I talk about, if this is the reason why he's allowed to do these things, like him being real, like this is, I think, the centerpiece of responding to the problem of evil, is that God delegated authority, and it's not him who's like doing this, and like he can incorporate these things for our good. Like there's no there's no to me there's no question there that God can use the pain that the evil one brings about. He can incorporate it and use it for our good, but ultimately, like we don't need to baptize every evil. We don't need to baptize every like really painful evil thing and saying like, oh, actually this is like good that this is happening. We can be like, no, an enemy has done this. So those are, I think, the two really central areas, at least to me. If you have other areas where you think, pop up, or that, the theology of Satan is important too, then by all means, like throw them in.
Yeah, well, I definitely just want to say, like, yes, I do think the theology of Satan is important, just in regards that, yeah, like he is a real person, and not like one of these other ideas of like, oh, it's only your sinful nature and all of those other things. I guess one of the things that I would say is that it does place, to put it in a more practical way, like there is a very real spiritual warfare. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too ethereal in this sense, but I've definitely had certain more real and live experiences and stuff like that, in which there's an issue. If somebody has a very real spiritual problem,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't believe in that side of things,
Mm-hmm.
you will struggle to solve it,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll one, be trying to fix your health, and two, you'll be trying to psychologize the rest of it. And if it is a legitimately spiritual issue, those things will never fix it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that just understanding, like, no, 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 look, this is a real, legitimate spiritual issue that needs to be dealt with, is critical. It's very important. And, when we talk about like, oh yeah, what is it? The enemies of our warfare. We do not fight against, flesh and
Mm-hmm.
blood, but we fight against the rulers and powers and princes of this dark world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like, okay, like what does Paul mean there? And he's like, oh, he just means your own evil desires. And it's like, no, like there's more than that. And there are important aspects that we need to be proactively fighting against. Now, what that means is
Mm-hmm.
definitely not all right, everyone go get your swords. No, no, no. But I think that it's just important to understand that they are there and to be made aware of them. And I love what Paul also says, right? We are not ignorant concerning the schemes of the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I think some people today just are ignorant. They're extremely ignorant. So,
Yeah, Heiser had on his podcast. I don't remember their names. He had on his podcast two women who worked in a type of, I think it was a type of deliverance ministry or something regarding those lines. So it was these two women who they worked with people who were the victims of ritual. It was like ritual satanic abuse or something like that. It was people who
mhm.
as kids, or something along these lines. It was these were people who, when they were younger, they were being used in satanic rituals. Like they were being used in what we would consider demonic witchcraft rituals. And so and they were continuing to experience spiritual suffering and spiritual problems, um, connected with that. And I remember them mentioning something along the lines of, like, they worked with these people, that there were times where they'd be with someone and they would be trying all these different things of like, um, singing hymns or saying prayers. But I remember one of them saying, and there was one point where like nothing was working until I finally just said something like, be quiet, watcher, or something like that. Like it's just like, it called them is like, I don't remember, she said like, in the name of Jesus, be quiet, watcher, or something along those lines. But it's like taking these ideas that guys like Heiser, you know, um, like develop and talk about, and that was them applying it to a practical, scenario where, like if these were people who they were just like, there's nothing spiritual going on. This is just, this
Mhm.
is just you having psychological problems. We'll fix it with the drug. We'll fix it, with these things you were talking about. It's like, I don't know if that would have like solved the problem. And yeah, it's interesting because this gets into like concepts, and like this is not an area that I'm like exceptionally or even like moderately well read in when it comes to like deliverance ministries and like spiritual warfare and stuff like that. I will say I've had interesting experiences in my life. I've had like one particular interesting experience in my life where like I I said the phrase, like in the name of Jesus, I rebuke you, and that was the thing that worked. And other things, praying, Lord's Prayer, Jesus Prayer, stuff like that, that wasn't working. And then I did that, and it was like instant. And so yeah, like and that's the idea of like something that I bring up or I think about in when it comes to like atonement stuff and Satan is Jesus's language of binding the strong man. Like that's what Jesus comes to
Mhm.
do. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so that's that'll preach. That'll preach. I've cracked the joke. I cracked the joke about the beginning that like this is like the way to start out like a 9 something a.m. on a Thursday. But shoot, if like yeah, like Jesus came to bind the strong man, and like hallelujah.
Yeah, well, and I think that what's important about that is that that is also our job. That's
Yeah.
what we're supposed to continue to do. And
Mhm.
I think it is missing from some people's theology,
Mhm.
and they're just ignorant towards it, and they
Mhm.
can't really tell the difference. And yeah, I mean, I'd probably say that honestly, I have more personal experience than I do books read. Like I maybe read a
Mhm.
little bit on a few books, but yeah. Fortunately, I did have some other people that were more helpful in guiding me and talking to me about different things like that. And to be honest, in one way, I don't like to tell a lot of stories about that stuff. Like there are
Mhm.
appropriate times. I do think there are appropriate times, and I do bring out some fun ones every now and then. But it's just not one of those things that you should focus on. Like it's,
Mhm.
so it's like, yeah, it's kind of, sometimes they're kind of interesting and cool and everyone always wants to hear them.
Mhm.
But it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, yeah. How much time did the Bible spend talking about that stuff? Oh, not a lot. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Like proportionally when we look at everything. But this is one of the other parts that I think is really fascinating. And I
Mhm.
think it does go together to some degree with some of your stuff talking about like yeah the binding of Satan, because here's one of the major things that I do think is profoundly interesting is how many exorcisms do we see in the Old Testament? The
Mhm.
answer is none,
Yeah.
right? And then when Jesus shows up, like there's all these exorcisms, and it's like what is going on? Like
Mhm.
why is this happening? And I think it's incredibly important, and I want to relate it back to the dominion and all that other stuff, right? And I
Mhm.
think this plays into some of your stuff because it has to do with that legal framework,
Mhm.
right? The legal framework. And I think this is also just really, really practical for us as believers is that, all right, you've got Christ taking back the dominion. So he's taking back the legal ground. And then we have Satan and we have us supposed to bind Satan. And sometimes it's like, oh, like, man, there seems like there's demonic activity. And you're wondering, like, well, why is that? And it's like, oh, well, you've missed the fact that so and so has been doing seances for like the last 3 months and
Yeah.
here. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's like, well, why would they be here? Well, probably because somebody invited them. So they kind of have
Mhm.
that, all that legal permission. And it's like, oh, yeah, you should like cancel that. So,
Yeah, you should knock that off. Yeah, yeah, so yeah, I've heard stories of yeah, so people who are engaged in that type of stuff, they will talk about real spiritual experiences they have with what we would consider demons or evil spirits. I remember reading Hugh Ross has an interesting book. I think it's Green Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men or something like that. And he's talking about aliens and whether or not they exist. But there's a section of it where he talks about like essentially alien cults. So like these type of, like there are these weird,
Hmm.
just weird alien cults. And some of the stories he gives of reports of like things associated with some of these alien things, it's like it's pretty wild. But one of the things that he at least he argues or nuances, and I think there's been pushback on him on some of this, so like take it all with a grain of salt. But one of the things at least he argues is that with a lot of these things, like when you look into like these people doing these things and reporting these experiences, they're often engaged in like they're engaged in these new age practices of like astral projection
Hmm.
or like Ouija board or like something like that. And so here's an idea to think about, right? So in here's something I find interesting, right? Because like we're talking about spiritual warfare and like nefarious Elohim and stuff like that. So you've got Jesus. So you've got Jesus in the New Testament, and hot take. New Testament presents Jesus as like the guy, right? Like he is the Lord. He's Yahweh, right? He's associated with the identity of Yahweh. He's Lord, right? He's the guy you need to submit to. What I find interesting is that there is many there's many different like religious traditions or like cults or whatever you want to call them. I'll say cults or religious traditions because some of them are like so small and so weird, like cult's probably the right name, but the other ones I don't want to necessarily like be pejorative and call them that, even if one might argue they'd meet that criteria. um some of them, or many of them, they all have as part of their origin story, this angel came to me, or like this cosmic being came to me and they told me
Yeah.
this stuff. But what's really interesting is like the stuff that they get told is like it's always like usually radically different, except for one crucial feature, which is like you don't need a Jesus isn't the guy. Like he's a guy. He's really cool, but he's not like God. Like don't think that. So like this happens with Islam. Like Islam, like oh like an angel came to me and Jesus isn't God. Like you have this with like Mormonism, right? Like oh like Jesus, this angel came and he's got these tablets and actually, at least the way that Christians think about Jesus being God, like that's not it, right? And all this stuff. Um, because I know Mormons would affirm that they think Jesus is divine in some sense, but not in the sense that Christians would affirm it, or
Yeah.
I mean, what you would call Orthodox Christians would affirm it. You have this in like what's this called? Like the type of stuff that Ross talks about, like in these weird alien texts, like oh, I'm this cosmic being, an alien from an inner dimension, and actually, like I don't know, Jesus is one of us. I'm just like paraphrasing based off memory here, so like don't quote me on this, but like Jesus is one of us, and that's what it is. He's not actually a god, like there's all these things, and it's always like there's this some type of either like cosmic being, angel, whatever, and they're saying these different things, but there's like this common through line, which is like they're always trying to get you to like not believe in the deity of Christ, or like the lordship of Christ. And I just find like the conspiracy like theory. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I was having this conversation with friends the other day, like like we're all conspiracy theorists about something, but like if like one of my conspiracy theories is like, isn't it really funny that like all of these different like like people reporting religious experiences of like what we would say is wildly unorthodox like beliefs about Jesus, isn't it like crazy that like they're all disagreeing about like these really big things, but they all like one of the big things they all harp on is like don't worry, he's not like actually God, he's not actually divine, you don't hold to that, that's just that's like a real bill thing, like they don't want the people that they're like coming to, like that's one of the big things they want them to reject. And so the conspiracy nut inside of me,
Yeah.
like that's when I'm like, isn't this a funny little thing? Like if there is this divine realm and Lord and and fealty and loyalty to Jesus as the God of Israel and the rightful Lord and ruler of the world, if this is a big part of defeating the kingdom of Satan and us being transferred into the kingdom of light, yeah, isn't it not very surprising that a lot of these, Elohim would take these various forms, give wild stories, which are different based on maybe like the time and what they know is going to work in a certain situation. And they always incorporate that element. That's your conspiracy theory for the day. Your spiritual conspiracy theory. It's not about politics this time. That's my every scholar, theologian, lay, even like everyone has their personal biblical, like spiritual conspiracy theories are like, I can't prove it, right? But it just seems like this is going on. This is one of my hunches. So yeah, take that for what
Yeah,
it's
no,
worth.
this is actually really lines up with what I've heard from one of my cousins and a couple of my other friends. So my cousin has always said like, yeah, the whole point of it is like, yeah, why is it that all of the world's religions want to have Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
just not in the same place as Christianity?
Yes.
And it just reminds me also one of my pastors, he used to say is like, Satan doesn't care if you have Jesus, just so long as you have Jesus plus.
Mm.
You can have Jesus and fill in the blank, and there's
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of other stuff, that just, oh yeah, we've got Jesus, come to us. We have Jesus too. Like, don't worry, we have Jesus and a million other gods from Mormonism. Uh,
Yeah, that's
you know,
yeah, go
so
ahead. Yeah.
yeah, so you've got like all those differences. But then one of my other buddies, so he was on a huge conspiracy theory kick. He was looking
Mm-hmm.
into all the UFO stuff, all
Mm-hmm.
the, all that type of stuff. And he finally came to the conclusion and called me one day. It was like, I think I finally get the alien thing. He's like, they're all demons. And that was his conclusion too, because he said, like, wherever you see the alien stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you also see, yes, this spirituality. And so Hugh Ross is not the only person that I've heard say that. Like, I've heard it from other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all like pretty much in agreement, like, yeah. So, well, and one of the other ones that actually I did a podcast, it's on my little podcast. I don't have too many shows on there, but
Mm-hmm.
really, really great podcast with me and Lewis. And so he did a whole book called, oh man, I'm sorry, Lewis, I forgot the name of your book. It has something to do with the dragon. I can't remember though, but it was about drugs. The whole
Mm-hmm.
book is about drugs, and
Mm-hmm.
basically, number one, why Christians should not do them.
Yeah.
Because he's basically like, yeah, dude, if you look at this, like what the Bible's talking about, when it's talking about witchcraft, is
Mm-hmm.
it's talking about taking drugs to try and have spiritual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, that's what the Bible is strictly against. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what people are doing when they're, attempting to go on acid and some of the harder
Mm-hmm.
drugs. But anyway, he goes through a lot of really good stuff. It's a pretty good episode. But one of his main connections was exactly that. He's like, yeah, you see people, what, going under this stuff and then interacting with these
Yep.
other beings.
Spirit guides, astral beings. Yeah.
And that is exactly what the Bible speaks against.
Yep.
When the Bible's like, oh yeah, no mediators or mediums, necromancers, all those types of things. Yeah. Well, and you know what else I'll tell you that's interesting, and this is purely anecdotal, but like I've been to Bourbon Street, I've
Mm-hmm.
been to, if you ever go to that city right there, New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
at night, they
Mm-hmm.
have a ridiculous, like it's the most I've ever seen in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
All the streets are flooded with fortune tellers and soothsayers, like all that stuff. It
Mm-hmm.
is very, very, very dark. The whole city is very dark. Oh man, I don't know if I want to say this too much, but like, do you ever remember when they got flooded? There was a long time
Mm-hmm.
ago. There was a
Oh
it was
yeah, I remember that.
Hurricane Katrina, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just wiped out New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a few Christians who said this was the judgment of God. Okay.
Yeah.
And they got tons of hate and flack for that. But the thing about reading the Bible is when you read the Bible, you know what God is doing and not doing. When you
Mm-hmm.
actually see things in the real world, you don't really get the same narration. And I'll just say, like, it would not surprise me at all if it was.
Yeah.
Like, when we were there, this is the greeting by most, like, multiple businesses. You go in and they're like, oh, hey, everyone's really friendly. Number one, everyone
Mm-hmm.
is super friendly. And they ask you, it's like, I don't, they get plenty of tourists. Like, oh yeah, are you here for business or debauchery? Like, that's their
Jeez.
greeting.
Yeah.
Multiple business owners, like, oh yeah, you're here for business or debauchery?
Yeah.
Like, that is totally the understanding of what the city
Yeah.
is like. So yeah,
Yeah.
don't do
The
drugs.
yeah, the thing you said about everyone like wanting to incorporate Jesus, I think it was JP Moreland who had a comment once about like um Jesus is the big cheese that everyone wants a slice of. And so, or something along those lines when it comes to these other religions. It was something along those lines. He's like, you might as well come to Christianity because, Jesus is the big cheese that everyone wants a slice of anyways, but we just actually have the real deal. We have the real thing. Yeah, that's one of the things, like, that's one of the reasons that, like, or at least I think that's one of the reasons that I've been drawn towards wanting to put something out regarding Christology, is because, like when I was young, and now I'm old and wizened. Um, when I was a young lad, a young buck, I was like so into arguments about God, and I'm still interested in that. I still have some stuff I might put out on that. I was really interested in arguments for God's existence, arguments for the resurrection, stuff like that. But realistically, very few people are atheist. Like very few, like statistically. Um, and if you like the majority of the people on the planet, if I remember my statistics, the majority, or at least a whole lot of them, they all are on board with we need to pay attention to Jesus. So we need to pay attention to what he's saying, like whether it's Mormon, Muslim, Jehovah Witness, weird, whatever, New Age, spiritual, Jesus consciousness. Like everyone, like a lot of people are
Yeah.
on board with Jesus in some sense. Um, the biggest thing, or like to me, what seems to be one of the biggest things, is questions about who Jesus was. And so that's one of and like I've been like less than thrilled with like either the arguments or the resources out there. And so that's at least that's one of the reasons this has been weighing. Like I'm not one of those Christians who wants to like baptize everything I do by saying like God led me to do this. Like I get irritated by things, and then I'm just like I need to make a video, like I just like do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so whether or not it's like God leading me to do it, or whether or not it's just like my own pedantic nonsense, which like that's honestly jury's out. Like I've been working on this, and so yeah, like I like that this started as like a podcast, or a video about Satan, and then it's just come about to us talking about like Jesus and like cults and stuff like that. But no, you're
That is
right.
the
Uh,
important part.
Yeah, like everybody wants a slice of Jesus, but it's just like, what's the Jesus we're getting?
So I'm curious what you think about this,
Hmm.
because it is really fascinating to me, and I've honestly just wondered. And there's an old quote about it, right? I've honestly wondered if, because like we were talking about the fall of Satan, right?
Hmm.
But what we were explaining is by far a minority view. Like honestly, I didn't never even heard of the view from anyone else. I actually like came to that conclusion by myself first,
Hmm.
that like Satan falls in the garden. But I totally wondered, I was like, dude, like, did Satan like cover up his fall on purpose?
Yeah, yeah,
You know
that's
what I
interesting.
mean? Like, I'm
Yes.
serious.
Yeah. So I'm going off memory here. So there's a pretty good spot. So this podcast is by uh two Orthodox Christians. I think one is a priest, one is a scholar, or maybe they're both priests, but one of them is also like I think an Ugaritic scholar. It's called the Lord of Spirit podcast, and this actually in many ways was like my gateway drug to Heiser, because like I was like listening to these guys and like hearing them say like some bizarre stuff, but then I'm like, it chafed with like the Protestant upbringing I had, and then like I found Heiser, and I was like, okay, it's not just like these weird Orthodox guys who were saying it. Like he was like a pretty thoroughgoing. Like I think Heiser might have been considered an evangelical scholar. Um, but so it's Lord of Spirits, and something they were talking about is if I remember correctly, they talk about this. It's like, yeah, so like you look at like the ancient Near East, and you look at like the mythologies that are there, and you get a pretty common story of, I think it's called the secession myth. There's this idea of there's the high god, and he gets like there's this rebellion against the high god, or high figure, whether or not it's Kronos, or I forget what the figures were in like the Mesopotamian ones, but there's this high god, and he gets overthrown by the younger god, and now the younger upstart god, he's now the one in charge. um, that's the opposite of what Christianity says, which is that there was a rebellion, and the rebellion failed, and and then the rebel got beat down, right? Like he got cast down, and so on and so forth. So let's use Baal as an example. So if I remember correctly, it's like in Christianity, it's like the Satan rebels, he loses, and God casts him into the underworld, right? But I think with Baal, at least in like the Canaanite religion, again going off fuzzy memory here, it's Baal. There's this kind of this battle. Baal wins, um, and Baal. It's not that he gets cast into like the underworld or anything like that. It's like he goes there willingly, or like he's rewarded with it or something along those lines. So like there's a difference on the story, like in the Baal story, it's not that Baal it's not that he like rebelled or fought El or something like that. So anyways, but there's this idea of, it's like, listen, a lot of these stories, maybe like these secession myths, like, is this just like demonic propaganda? Is this just like Satan like retelling the story of like what happened in all these other different areas? Like he's retelling it like with his version, of like, oh yeah, like I
Yeah.
rebelled and I was successful and like I'm the high god now, like everybody's like mine, like, and then you have Yahweh, who's like the God of Israel, and he's like, let's set some things straight here. Like, it's like, and I like, listen, I think the way like Yahweh does things is what's I want to use the phrase, like, gangsta's the wrong word, right? Like, but like the way that like that's the vibe. Like the way Yahweh does things, right? Is Yahweh's like, okay, like you guys can all have these nations, right? You can have all these nations that are big. I'm gonna take this one guy and I'm gonna defeat you with, like, I'm gonna take Abraham, he's gonna be mine, and I'm gonna take, like his descendants, and like I'm gonna start with like this super small ragtag group of, like people, and through them I am going to, like, Yahweh's essentially like, I'm gonna fight you with both hands tied behind my back, and you were still gonna get beat down into the dust. Like that's how much you're gonna get wrecked. And so I find that just like really interesting that like that's how Yahweh does, and like that's the way that Yahweh like communicates, and like he has these prophets and things along those lines. Like when like I think it's Elijah does the competition with
Yeah.
the prophets, right? Like it's the Baal is the like the god of like associated with thunder and rain and stuff like that. And so there had been this drought on the land. And so this is like Yahweh saying like, I'm the god, like I'm the god of thunder, right? It's like I'm over this, right? And then it's after this confrontation with the prophets of Baal in which they get like smoked, right? It's after that, and like always Yahweh is clearly victorious. That's when rain comes upon the land. Like the way that Yahweh does things
Yeah.
is like he's like, no, we're gonna correct some things here. We're like with the Egyptians, right? Like there's this idea of like the Egyptian gods being over the frogs or the Nile or this, and then Yahweh comes in and he's like, oh, like you're the god of the Nile, you're the god of frogs. No, 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 I'm the god of frogs. And like, and just like messes everything up. Like it just shows that like I'm in charge here. Like I just think I think that's funny, and not in like in a disrespectful way. I think it's funny because that is, I think, a really humorous and, for lack of a better word, gangsta way to go about doing this. Like that is just like, like in our parlance, that is just such a like in your face like power move. Maybe that's the better phrase. Like that is such a power move way of doing things. Of just like, yeah, sorry, that's my little like comment on that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just think it's really interesting that so because and now I'm totally curious if you have any, since you've been studying some of these things, but when you look at the Genesis 3 account, right?
Uh-huh.
And let's imagine you view it correctly,
Mhm.
whatever. Like the serpent is an actual, angelic being,
Mhm.
seraphim or whatever. And so he's going through in the garden tempting mankind, and then, the whole fall and all that stuff happens, right? I'm not aware of another source that has the story like that.
Oh, interesting. Like
Do you know what I mean? Like, because we know
yeah.
there are stories that are similar about Adam. There are stories
Mhm.
about Noah. So we've got some other stories that are like, oh, yeah, those are kind of similar. There's even one that involves a serpent, um, and a king of Egypt and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I can't remember
That's
which one that is right
interesting.
now.
But like
But
serpent being defeated in that way.
but there isn't anything quite like this. And
Mhm.
especially when you look at the promises for Messiah,
Mhm.
it's a novelty. Like, and
Mhm.
I'm stating this because, like, yeah, it does. It stands out,
Mhm.
and of course, also for all the other ones that are like, oh, it's the same, it's the same, and it's like, okay, look, if you actually look at the stories, like, they're not that similar, like
Mhm.
some people want to make out. And so this is one of the ones that I think is really interesting and unique. And like you're talking about, like, oh, lots of the other myths sound like, yeah, demonic propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, it's interesting that this one, they don't even have Satan there for most of them, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I quote like a bunch of Old Testament scholars today that are all like, it's just a snake, no
Yeah,
angelic being, nothing else.
I think
Now,
that's
the funny
nonsense.
thing
Yeah.
that to be the, you know, Ryan Mullins, Dr. Heiser type of question, in my opinion. And
Mm-hmm.
I've asked them all this, right? Yeah. So why does it talk? Oh, I don't know. It is like, okay, like, I mean, it's literally even in some
Yeah.
commentaries where it's like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty weird that it talks. I mean, animals didn't talk back then, and all those. And it's the biggest actually smackdown question you can put on any of them, because they literally just have no response. And I'm like, give me a break, right? It's
Yeah.
just one of those ones where it's like, okay, yeah, it's just a snake, except it talks for no real apparent reason.
Yeah.
And there aren't any other ancient stories of snakes just talking.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is all very important. And the practical element though that I really think that most people should come away with to some degree, and I think it's really fascinating when you look at the story, right? Notice Satan doesn't come around and curse Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this is what I hear from popular stuff, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't confess this, but I'm kind of tired of arguing with some people that are arguing under all these false pretenses.
Yeah.
And one of the big ones that I hear is they're like, well, Satan is like so powerful, like, and this just isn't fair. Like, why does Satan have so much power and we have so little power?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, so like, yeah, why didn't Satan just like smite Adam and Eve or something like this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the big tricks, secrets, however you want to market, is that, guess what? Like, the vast majority of power that he ends up gathering over us
Mm-hmm.
is through his deceptions,
Yeah, like
right?
that's one of those things that I addressed in that live stream I did with Mike, is like, because the guy was like, oh, like us, Satan, he's just he's over here and he's pretty much omniscient and omnipotent and he just has free reign on us. Like, we just can't possibly like combat this. I'm like, where are you getting that idea from? Like, you know what I we like, that's not the, like, I don't get that idea from scripture. Um, yeah, it's not like Satan is allowed to do things, but I don't see any concept in the Bible that like Satan has free, unrestricted like reign to just wreck you no matter what.
Well, and the other great story that I think about that I really do think is connected with that same motif,
Hmm.
it's the story of Balaam. The
Yes.
story of Balaam.
Yeah.
And Balaam wants to go out there and he wants to curse Israel. Well, that's what he's supposed to be doing,
Hmm.
right? And he gets there and he's like, yeah, so I
Nah.
can't do that.
Yeah.
Can't do that, bro. That's not going to work for me. And the king's like, dude, like, that's what I hired you for. I called you so you curse Israel, right? And he's like, no, like, and it's, of course, very reminiscent to me to the Job narrative.
Hmm.
It's the idea that it's like, hey, they have a hedge around them, and
Hmm.
you can't curse them, right? And I think that's incredibly relevant. Like when you look at the story of Job, and I know everyone might then be like, Job's not a great example to pull from, but at the same time, I actually do think it is. He is a good
Hmm.
story to pull from. Is the point that Job was righteous because he was righteous, because he wasn't in sin, because he didn't believe the lies of the devil.
Hmm.
Satan couldn't touch him.
Hmm.
And that was the whole thing, right? He's like, well, you put a hedge around his finances and his family and,
Hmm.
everything. He's basically like, life is good because you've protected him,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yeah, Balaam is actually, I wrote a when I did my master's in theological studies, I did a paper on the oracles of Balaam, and I went through some, like dissertations that were written on that. Um, yeah, it's an interesting passage. What I think is interesting, like one of the things that interesting is about Balaam, is he kind of seems like in the story, hear me out, give me some grace. In the story, he kind of seems like a decent guy. Like, they're like, "Oh, hey, will you come do this?" And he's like, "I gotta check with God. Like, I gotta check with God first." And then God's like, "No." And then Balaam's like, sorry, no bueno, I'm not gonna do it. And then it's like, I think Balak, I think it is like offers some money, and then Balaam's like, maybe God stuttered, let me go back and check. And then God's kind of like, okay, you want to play this game? Like, you can go. But like even then, Balaam says like, listen, I'll come, but I'm not gonna say anything that like God doesn't tell me to say. Like I'm not gonna say anything that like the part or something along those lines. Um, and then like like it's kind of a funny story because like Balak's like, bro, what are you doing? That's the exact opposite. And Balaam's like, I can't help it. Like I just this is what you get. I told you, like this is what you were gonna get. This is what you get. Like I can't do it. Yeah, it's a funny story. It's kind of a powerful story too because like this is through the mouth of like a pagan prophet that Yahweh is bringing blessings on his people, right? Is like speaking blessings on his people. It's
Yeah.
through a pagan prophet who later gets killed for doing some bad
Right.
stuff. Like,
Well, yeah. So yeah, because like Balaam wasn't really a good guy in the end, and it's
no.
it's like, oh, so Israel does kind of end up in the bad, but how do they get there? They get there the same way as the garden, in a
Hmm.
sense, right?
Yeah.
Because they're they Balaam says like, oh yeah, well send your women over there, get them to worship idols, and then it'll kind of remove God's covering from them. And it's like, oh, that's like the same thing with Adam and Eve, in that, uh, Satan used Eve to
Hmm.
get to Adam to, have the sin happen and all that stuff. So, but yeah,
Satan
the
knows
point
it's
is just
hard
that
to
it's
say
like,
no to a pretty woman. Like that's the Satan like sees men, sees their psychology, and he's like, I know the path here. I'm saying this in jest. This is not a pejorative statement to women. I'm married. Like this, like this is not like some red pill nonsense. I want to make people be clear here. Like I want to but no, what's crazy though is like, okay, so like we'll be finishing up soon. But here's what's crazy is like the angels, like at least according if you go like on Mike Heiser, like supernatural interpretation of like Genesis 6, the angels were like having trouble, or like the sons of God, like I'm using anachronistic terms here, these
yeah,
sons
yeah.
of God, like these spiritual beings were having trouble resisting women. Like that's how wild it
I
is.
have, yeah, yeah, I
That's
have
how
no,
beautiful women are. That's how beautiful women are. That's how beautiful women are. And if you're a woman, like take this as a compliment.
oh man,
Not once, but twice were when women used to seduce mankind away from Yahweh. And even like spiritual beings who aren't even like men were like, yeah, let's go see if we can essentially let's go see if we can get with that. Like they say, I think
yeah,
even in the Enoch story it says they saw that they were beautiful and they decided, I think it's something along those lines, and they were like, let's go. Like
yeah.
that's your fun in
But
philosopher's garb take for the day is yeah.
but Job was red pilled,
Job
and
is
he
red pilled.
said no. Yeah,
That's
Job was
actually,
red pilled,
you're actually,
and
you know what, yeah, you're actually, I mean not red pill, I know what you mean. Even Job was like, nope, bye. Job was
he's
like,
like, no, you speak like foolish women speak, back
yeah.
woman. No, and seriously, that actually is one of the aspects that contrasts with all the stories, is that Job is the only one to say no to his wife.
Yeah. And then here's the other side of that is, think about how much women were used on the flip side. Mary being used to, bring about, Jesus, and the role that the women played in the discovery of the empty tomb. Like it's almost, and I remember correctly, I think Heiser talks about the women that were used or mentioned in the genealogies of Jesus. I might be misremembering this, but like there being a significance there of,
Mhm.
the women that were played. So it's interesting. Just I mean, maybe this is intentional, maybe not. But I think it's interesting that like we crack these jokes there, but then it's almost on the flip side when it comes to the redemption of humanity. Like women played a central role. And so that's
Well, that is
interesting.
part of the prophecy of Genesis 3, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know
Through the
better than
woman that
I.
salvation's gonna come. So,
Yeah.
well, see, you have all of those things, and this is one of the things, like for because I know sometimes I don't know, sometimes women get all caught up, and it's like, oh, the negative verses on women, but I actually think it's one of those notions of like, which kind of woman are you going to be? Are
Hmm.
you going to be a foolish woman, or are you going to be a wise woman? Because I think
Mhm.
that, the epitome of, wisdom is embodied by the feminine idea, right? And so a
Mm.
wise woman will be great, help and aid to her husband and her family and everything. So
Mhm. Dude, can we take a second to just recognize there's a guy just going wild in the chat. We have like, for
yeah,
those of you
yeah,
who are
yeah.
watching the recording, you probably can't see it. We have one guy who has spent like, there have to be like 40 messages here, just like most of which are all caps. And I just like, hey man, thanks for hanging with us. I hope you enjoy some of it. Like I just like I periodically have been checking the chat and like the watching now, and like thanks for hanging out with us, Nathan. He's like, I'm like this
Yeah.
all day. You've got enthusiasm, my man. I
High
can,
octane.
yeah, high energy. So at least you're passionate. I haven't read honestly most of your messages. I don't think. I've just like looked at them briefly. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm probably not gonna read them after the chat either because just the general vibe I'm getting. But thanks for hanging with us. Maybe you should, maybe you'll like more of our content. I don't know if he's a follower of yours or follower of mine.
Yeah, I've actually I've known him from X, I think.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
yeah. Oh,
Nice.
cool. Well, like I don't know. What's like the last one you want to tackle? Any interesting Satan ones you want to tackle?
Do you have any residual questions? Because I think you said you mentioned you had some things you were gonna run by me. Hit me
Yeah,
with
let
it.
me glance. Mm, do. Okay, okay. Yeah, it has to do a little bit with like, okay, Satan being the accuser, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Is he only an accuser of God's chosen people, or is he also an accuser of the wicked?
That's interesting. My default, I think my answer that I'm gonna say is that he's the accuser of everyone. And so my thought here is like there's this general statement. So this is something that pops into my mind. Is there's this
Mhm.
general statement in Paul in Colossians, right? Yeah, I think it's Colossians. Of there was the record of death that stood against us, which this used to be my favorite verse when I was like a piano. It was one of my go-to verses when I was a piano substitution guy. I'm like, there's a debt, and then like I conveniently didn't notice that like, oh, like this debt that stood against us is connected with like the rulers and authorities being defeated. But so there's this general statement about like there's this handwriting, right? Like there's this handwriting, this note of debt that is against us. Um, yeah, I think that's against everybody. And so there was this in general, but here's the thing, I have ideas actually.
Uh-huh.
So okay, we're gonna leave people wanting more, right? So here's an interesting thing about atonement, right? So there's this general idea that like we were all guilty, and we were all guilty beforehand, and whoa boy were we in a bad spot. And to some degree that's true, like we had like we were like transgressed enough, or were part of Satan's domain, so on and so forth. But there's this idea by Jesus that if I hadn't have come, you wouldn't have been guilty. There's this idea, it pops up, I think it's twice, like because I was looking into this about how it relates to penal substitution. And this is a verse that I think every atonement model is going to have to deal with. But I think PSA struggles more than normal, because there's this idea of Jesus saying like, yeah, like if you're blind and you don't see, like you're not guilty, but now you've seen, so now you have guilt. There's this idea of like the guilt that we bear is connected with him coming and him being revealed and things like that. And I'm almost tempted to like connect that with like this idea, and I think it's Acts, where I think it's something like God looked over the times of ignorance, but now he's calling all to repentance, right? So there's this idea where, in a sense, like it seems almost like we're guilty in one sense of like we've transgressed,
Mhm.
we've done things that Satan can use to like bring this claim against us. But it's almost like in this other sense where it's like in the eyes of God, God's like, I'm not going to consider you guilty. Like I'm not going to hold this against you because I knew you didn't know. Like I'm not going to factor that in. And there's even this phrase in the Proverbs where it's like, you say you didn't know, you say you weren't aware. Like, won't the Most High account for that? Like, won't the judge know that and factor that in? So I think that's interesting. I think so. To get back to your question, I went on a little bit of sidetrack there. To get back to your question, I think that Satan is the accuser of everybody. It's just there are some people who are bigger fish, maybe. You know what I mean? Like the high priest Joshua, I think, was a bigger fish for him to land. Job is a bigger fish for him to land. Um, or maybe
So
there's
let me
just a
push
more.
back a little bit,
Yeah, go for it. Go for
just
it. Yeah.
to so because this is one that I haven't really settled myself anyway. But
Mhm.
it seems to me, because I was thinking about it though, and I was like, it seems more like he's only an accuser of the brethren,
Mhm.
and the reason would be because the others already belong to him.
Mhm.
And so what he's doing is he's standing there to accuse. He's standing there to accuse others of breaking God's law, and
Mhm.
basically trying to say, hey, they belong on my side now.
Mhm.
Like, they broke the rules, they crossed the lines. Now send them my way.
Mhm.
One justification that I'll give for this, I'll only give one at the moment,
Mhm.
would be the story of Cain and Abel, right?
Mhm.
And it's this idea that, Cain becomes the first seed of the serpent as he transgresses and murders Abel, right?
Mhm.
And that's what First John 3 says. And that's where, Jesus is getting this idea, sort of when he's talking about the Pharisees, oh, you're children of the devil and all that stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so it's like, okay, cool. So like Cain seems to cross over, so to speak. Like that's the point of the narrative anyway, the point of the
Mhm.
story. And so yeah, so what do you have to say about that?
So I think my initial thought is like, yeah, like Satan has those guys, but like, how did he get him? Because I think of it like Satan has these people already, but like, how did he get him? Because I think how I would want to think is like
Sure,
Satan
sure.
got them by going to the divine council or in something like this and being like, yeah, like look at him, like he did this thing, like but send him my way. If that's all, I think maybe my default is like to think that like all that come to be his come about because he's filed this claim in the divine council, and then kind of what Jesus does is Jesus says, I'll, however you want to phrase this, like I'll file a counterclaim, I'll overturn that claim, I will, render that claim null and void. I will set it aside, nail it to the cross, all this stuff. I will do that for anyone who comes to play on Team Jesus. Like anyone who like repents and like puts their faith in me and follows me and believes in me, they will like that lawsuit that was brought that was holding you captive. That's going to get overturned, and the devil's going to get disbarred. That's my initial thought, but I think this is an interesting idea, and I think it's worth further research and further investigation.
Well, like, let me ask this one last question, like the
Yeah.
more simple one in a
I'll let
sense,
this be
right?
the I'll let this be I won't answer it. I'll let it be the question that we end on. How about that? You can get the final word that you leave us with. Yeah.
But it would be the idea, right? Did Satan have to continue to go back up to heaven for
Mhm.
every accusation against Hitler?
Mm. That's a
So
good one.
yeah,
Yeah. I'll
food
leave
for
it
thought,
there. Yeah.
everyone.
Yep.